Hi guys, this is the first video. I'm going to go through the first essay of the 5 essays that you will, well 6 essays that you will be asked for on the PY3, so that's Unit 3 for WJEC Board for Psychology. So as you probably are aware, coming up to the exam, that you have to answer 2 out of a choice of 3 essays, and that there are possible 6 essays that can come up. So that means that you can afford to not revise 1. Yay! So our college basically teaches us 5 essays and leaves 1 out, but we get an option of whether we want to do that. So we're given the essay, but we're not actually taught it. Now your college might do that, or they might teach all 6, so then you can choose which one you don't like, and then you cannot revise it. So the 5 that we revise, or that we're taught, are the advantages of the scientific method and the disadvantages of the scientific method, ethical issues, the dealing with ethical issues, and the ethical issues arise in 2 applications. There is another one which is the ethical issues of non-human participants. Now this is the one that we do. We're given the essay, but personally I've chosen not to revise that because that's just another 2 hours of revision added on when I don't really need it. So the first one I'm going to go over today is the advantages of the scientific method. Quite a quick explanation is that I'm going to focus on 3 main advantages. I'm then going to do point evidence explained, so it's coming useful from all those high school lectures that you've had off your teacher saying you must do point explanation evidence. So basically we're going to use that, so it's going to come into use. I'm going to use that for each of the 3 advantages, which basically helps structure your essay as well. So the 3 main advantages that I've come up with is that it is empirical, the scientific method is objective, and it also allows replication. Now let's focus on the empirical. So this is the first point. Now this is my AS A-level psychology book, and it is my essential word dictionary. It's been really helpful when coming up with kind of writing my essays. So I've looked up the definition for empirical, and it states that data that are collected through direct observation or experiment rather than being generated from a theory. And there is an example here that says if one wanted to decide whether the world would end in 20 days, the rational approach would be to argue that such a thing was unlikely. The empirical approach would to wait and see what happened. Now that's quite an interesting explanation. And empiricism is the view that all behaviour is learned as opposed to being inherited. So that's your kind of like behaviourist approach rather than your genetics and biological. So that explanation and definition has helped me to structure my essay. Now the main point of writing your essay is to get your point across. You want to say what the point is. So an advantage of the scientific method is that it is empirical. You're going to refer to empiricism. So you're going to say that empiricism is the belief that all behaviour should come from direct learning or direct observations or sensory experience. Now you can kind of manipulate that as to whichever way you like. And you can kind of refer to empirical methods, which is what the scientific method uses, and that's the kind of way of obtaining information and findings through direct observations and experiments. So you're going to explain why it's an advantage. So with it being empirical, it's an advantage because a hypothesis can be proposed and it can be tested. And because of that hypothesis, it means that it doesn't rely on arguments, beliefs, ideas, hearsay, or even common sense, which then makes the findings more reliable. Now, you want to use an example. Now, in PY2, so your second unit, we studied one of the main studies was Gardner and Gardner's research with Washoe. So you're going to use this example. So Washoe was a gorilla, or a monkey, whichever one, I can't remember which, but during their experiment they operationalised language. Now that meant that when Washoe used the signs, it must have been used spontaneously in the correct context. It must have used on 3 different and separate occasions. It must have been witnessed by 3 different researchers, and it also must have been used 15 days in a row. So this operationalization, that meant that the researchers it wasn't the researcher's opinion as to whether Washoe would actually use the signs and therefore demonstrated language. So that was a good kind of point, that that study in fact was empirical. Now your second point is objective. So the second advantage of the scientific method is it is objective. So that means that it provides evidence of a theory using research that has kind of used measurable data. Now that might sound a bit confusing, but there is evidence for theories that the research used to kind of test these theories has used data that can be measurable. So for example, in a lab experiment, this is done by controlling variables. So the IV is changed whilst others are kept the same, and the DV is measured. So why is this an example? Well, just referring to my notes, this is an advantage because the findings are not affected by the researcher's subjective expectation. So by being objective, it means that there's more certainty that the results that are going to kind of come from the experiment are reliable and internally valid. So this kind of data collection means that you can establish a causal relationship between the IV and the DV. So again, using one of your main studies from PY3, I've decided to use Loftus and Palmer's. So Loftus and Palmer's research into eyewitness testimony, they actually manipulated the IV, which was the change in the critical question of how fast were the cars going when they into each other, and then they measured the DV, which was the speed estimates of the participants. So by doing this, Loftus can establish that the change in the critical question actually caused the difference in the speed estimates that the participants came up with. So your final point is that the scientific method permits replication. So the final advantage is that the experiments and the observations are carried out rigorously and are reported in detail so that they can be replicated and verified. This is achieved through carefully standardising the instructions and the procedures. So this is an advantage because other researchers can repeat the research and measure the same variable in the same way that the original research did. And by doing this, the original results from the first experiment means that it's more reliable, and then therefore you can actually generalise the findings to a wider population. Now, a good example for this is Milgram. So Milgram did research into obedience to authority figures, and that had a standardised procedure which allowed Berger in 2009 to replicate this using different cultures, genders and even age groups. And he found that 70% of the participants were willing to continue to administer the full 450 volts, and because of this it made Milgram's findings more reliable, so then you can actually generalise it to large populations. So there are many advantages. There are things that it's falsifiable, there are things that it is valid, there's high reliability. So these kind of things can all fit in, but the main ones I focused on is that it's empirical, objective and allows replication, because these are quite easy ones to come up with examples for. So you've got your Gardner and Gardner with standardising language, you've got Loftus and Palmer's and kind of manipulating the IV, measuring the DV, so then you can come up with a causal relationship. And then you've got Milgram's obedience study, which was replicated by Berger, which was one of your alternative evidences for the Milgram. So, the next video I'm going to do is the disadvantages of the scientific method, and I hope you like this video. If you want any questions, just comment below and I'm happy to answer them. So, good luck guys!